The Dane and Derek Show is an uncensored, unfiltered podcast. Content warnings can be found in the episode description. Hello and welcome back to the Dane and Derek Show. Once again, a podcast where two nerdy friends keep in touch and shoot the shit. My name is Benig-Aiello. I'm a writer, director, and very frequent tabletop RPG player these days. And with me, as always, is my good friend and the Dread Pirate Dane Fogdall.
I am going to give no other or further things that I do. I am the Dread Pirate Dane, and that is all anyone may call me forever now.
Fantastic.
But welcome back to part 2 of The Princess Bride.
Yeah.
So this week I was hoping we would talk about sort of, I called it structure, but sort of like The Princess Bride in relation to other works and that are like it and different from it. And also just sort of how it structures itself, like what it is, rather than just sort of like enjoying it as is. So like, I think where I would want to start is like, I don't know how you feel about this description, but The Princess Bride for me feels like it's on a continuum.
Okay.
On a continuum between sort of like parodies and deeply self-serious work within like the fantasy adventure genre. And at the far end of parody, you kind of have... You have, you know, like Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Like that's like as like parody as you get, right? Mm-hmm. And then I think at the other end, I might put, say, The Lord of the Rings. I might actually put like Game of Thrones a step beyond that, but you know. And then kind of between that, I would say is Princess Bride is near the middle, but on kind of on the Monty Python side, and like Star Wars is also kind of near the middle, but on the Lord of the Rings side. How do you feel about that description?
I think that's pretty accurate, because I think last week I mentioned how it's sort of an homage to the swashbuckling genre, but it's also parodying a lot of things in the swashbuckling genre. Like, you said something really great that stuck out to me the other day, which was it felt like sets. You can see the notches on the rope for the stunts, and things feel very staged, and it's kind of funny, and it's kind of interesting to like look at, and very much like all those old like 20s, 30s, 40s swashbuckling films with like Douglas Fairbanks and Errol Flynn, like they're all on giant sound stages, right? With like these like plaster castles. And this film definitely had that texture that I don't think you wouldn't see that in like a Lord of the Rings or a Game of Thrones. Like they're going to do the best they can to make it not look like a plastered castle. But in this film, it does. And you know, like they're jumping around this like ruins, but this ruin has like a perfect like place for a backflip. It has a staircase, like a giant rope.
It's a ruin that was made to be sword fought upon. You know?
Yes, yeah, and like you can kind of tell that there's a matte painting, but it's part of the charm of it, right? Like a lot of these things are very charming that it pulls from, and I think like you don't really see that. Like if to make a swashbuckling film now, you couldn't sort of get away with those aesthetics. It'd be very hard.
Right.
You know?
Like I would say this, like the modern Star Wars prequels and sequels both have to be much more self-serious.
Yeah.
And not necessarily fully in the way that like Star Wars isn't a parody. It isn't. Right. But like I think about like the opening sequence in Return of the Jedi. Mm-hmm. That's very Errol Flynn, right? Like it.
Oh yeah.
Luke does backflips. You know, he does flips and like is on like a fucking, walks the plank, and you know, it's that same thing. And the only other film that suddenly comes to mind that actually pulls this off, that actually gets to be close to The Princess Bride in like my memory, is Pirates of the Caribbean, and specifically the first one.
Yeah, the first one truly is a swashbuckling film.
Yes. And so like something I was thinking about with all of this is that part of what works in like if you are, it is so hard, I think, to make an adventure film that is entirely serious, right? Even the Lord of the Rings doesn't fully do it. Legolas surfs downstairs on a shield, right? Like,
Yeah.
like like there's still moments, right?
Yeah, and like Pippin and Merry, like
Right. I think
Yeah.
it's one of the reasons why like Lord of the Rings ended up, or not Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones ended up falling flat outside of like serious structural issues, but like is that there was no life to it after a certain point. And so something that I'm that is the through line between all of these films that changes them from being like, I often think that like at the end Game of Thrones was almost a parody of itself, like like not in a meaningful way, right? Like it just was like cruel for the sake of being cruel and all kinds of stuff.
Right.
And at the other end, like Monty Python and the Holy Grail is just a raw parody. Like that's just what it is.
Yeah.
There is nothing truly earnest about it beyond the fact of them having a good time with it. I don't find the Holy Grail to be cruel, if that makes sense. Like sometimes a parody can be like just like shitting on something, whereas that does not feel that way. It feels like no, we're having a good time and these are all just jokes we've made, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail is Mystery Science Theater 3000 come to life, right? Like
Yes.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
The funny thing about The Princess Bride for me, and this is something that like Pirates of the Caribbean and Star Wars, like the original trilogy, do not do this, is that there is nothing about them that is a parody. They can be lighthearted, funny, not too self-serious, for sure. But they're not parodies. Princess Bride is a parody. It is. Like, it is. Because it is truly poking fun at and criticizing the genre. And yet, it is such an earnest film.
Yeah. There's
That
a
is
lot
like,
of heart.
Yeah, that is like maybe the most amazing thing to me about it, is that like so much of that movie is a joke, right? you know, like everything about Vizzini is a joke. There's nothing serious about it. The way he dies is hilarious. Humperdinck is such a cartoon of a villain. And yet, like at the end, I am so heavily rooting for Inigo. At the end, Wesley saying this like horrifying like speech to like intimidate him into the chair is fantastic, right?
Yeah.
And then of course and then Humperdinck like gets tied down, and then like Wesley reveals that he's bluffing, and like Humperdinck's like, I knew it, like, you know, like it becomes silly again. And then at the end, the boy and the grandfather have a conversation, and it's touching. Like that's the wild thing about it, is like somehow this fucking movie gets to be, you know, it gets to be Star Wars and Men in Tights at the same time. How does it get to do that? And that's why I think that the writing is the thing that is so key to that film.
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't know. Do you agree with me on that? Like that it gets to be the Pirates of the Caribbean level of like earnestness and like can be sweet and touching, and at the same time gets to do sort of like the Men in Tights, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, like deep parody thing at the same time. Like,
yes, I agree with that, because one of my favorite films of all time, Video Game High School, is exactly the same. It's fully possible, right? Like Video Game High School is a parody of video games and action movies and high school sports teams and all these other things that, you know, teens go through. It's sort of this parody of teen dramas and like coming of age films, but it's also in earnest like an action movie and also a coming of age movie and also a teen drama and also like a high school film. Like it truly is about like an outcast in high school, and you feel for Brian D. You know, it strikes that fine line of of like loving the genre, but also understanding that the genre has problems and understanding that there's a way to fix it through jokes and humor and parody that does not disenfranchise the what came before, but acknowledges the sort of ridiculousness of it. And I think that in and of itself is it's a very, very, very nuanced humor that I don't think a lot of people have or utilize, because it's very, you can very like it takes a lot of like finessing, right? This is a very finessed film.
Right. Like something that like comes to mind exactly is like, okay, in Lancelot's scene, major scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, he goes running in and like the music swells, right?
Mm-hmm.
As he's like running through the castle, stabbing everybody, right? That scene is almost kind of exists in Princess Bride with Inigo Montoya running through the castle halls. The music is swelling in the same way, and he's doing the same running thing, fighting guards. Like it's the same scene, almost to a T. Like made not that many years apart on sets of similar calibers with similar levels of fantastic actors, and just ever so slight changes to like the script and the way it's treated and all of these things, and one has heart and one is only funny, right? And in the same hand, there are scenes in Pirates of the Caribbean and Star Wars that are only played for the heart, right? Like these things, like I think that's what's amazing is that Princess Bride shows you how delicate and how very subtle the differences between these things actually are.
Yes.
Especially in this genre that is asks so much suspension of disbelief from its audience, you know? And you're right. I think Video Game High School does the same thing where it's like, yeah, there are holes in this thing we love. There are big fucking holes, and we're going to point them out and we're going to make you laugh at them. But also there's something here that's really important.
Yeah. And it's very difficult to cultivate that. It's so hard to, I think, kind of understand, you know, to really work that fine line. And I think, you know, like I really wonder like what the cutting room floor looked like for this movie. You know, I wonder what deleted scenes exist, and I wonder how many frames, right? Like how many frames did they leave out? Like were they going frame by frame to make sure that every joke, every serious moment was like the exact number of literal frames of celluloid that they needed to convey that, to compress it? Because it's not a long movie. It's a pretty short movie.
Yeah.
It's like a nice 90-minute movie, and there's no frame, there's no part of that movie that feels too long, too short, like on accident, right? Like the scene in Quicksand, it's long because it serves the purpose of stressing you out before they pop back up. Or, you know, the monologue on Wesley, like you'd never really see that. Like spoilers for Avengers Endgame. Imagine Avengers Endgame. Imagine that final monologue. Imagine if Iron Man gave that monologue to Thanos at the end.
Right.
Like you'd never see that. You'd never see that. And I think that's part of what makes it so special, is that it knows when to take space and it knows when not to take space, and it knows when to breathe. Like, you know, to always bring it back to Ma, there's a lot of Ma in this movie. And the way that it's used is very different than a lot of other like films. Like there's Ma in transitions, there's Ma in moments of silence, there's Ma in characters glancing at one another, there's Ma in a character like preparing to duel. There's all these sort of like there's equal parts breaths to actions, just as much as there's equal parts parody to serious, just as much as there's like it's very equal. Like if there's one funny thing, they immediately balance it out with something serious. If there's one serious thing, they immediately balance it out with something funny. Like when like, like with Vizzini, like there's like Vicini, while he is a cartoon, he is a little terrifying, like especially with that eel scene, right? Like he makes it
Yeah.
very clear to Buttercup that like she can either die with the eel or like live a little bit longer on the boat with him, right?
Yeah.
And like that's terrifying. But then the next scene, like they're getting chased by Dread Pirate Roberts, and he's like freaking out and like super confused and makes a dumb decision that Inigo Montoya and Fezzik point out, and it's like it begins to sort of balloon, right? And that train kind of builds, and it's super super interesting to kind of see, like when I think about like the structure of this film, right? It is like kind of like a 4-act film, right? There's your beginning that sets up all the important players. It sets up Humperdinck, it sets up Wesley, it sets up Buttercup, and it sets up how they're all separate from each other. And then like act
Yeah.
two is kind of, it brings like all the characters together, right? Like Humperdinck is on the trail of Wesley, and Wesley's on the trail of Inigo Montoya, Fezzik, and Vizzini and Buttercup, and then
Which is ridiculous on its own sense, right? Like there's something ridiculous about the idea of like there being like it's a 3-layer chase somehow.
Yes,
but it does add some fun tension.
Exactly. And then like your act 3 is kind of like, it's like it is the low point, right? It's the fire swamp. It's Fezzik and Inigo like going back to their old ways. Yeah, the torture scenes. It's Wesley getting wounded. Like no hero gets wounded in a movie these days.
Yeah, I did want to come back to that because you mentioned that before about how Wesley is weak, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, what we see in this film is less, because I was thinking about it, I was like, well, characters are in some ways more flawed than ever. Like using Marvel movies because they're an easy touchstone. Tony Stark is a deeply flawed character. He is. He is not really a character who is like ever put in a position of like, oh, what's the word? Like true humiliation. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like something that I find very, very is like Wesley has made a joke for a while, right? Like he flops around and like it's so funny, like to me. Like I can't even imagine how much fun that was for him as an actor to just be like, I'm gonna go boneless, I'm gonna be jellied, and you guys are gonna move me around, right? Like that's so much fun. But also it's like, yeah, this character is truly laid low, right? Like like I see what you mean by that. And I think that there is a lot to be said for no character being above a certain amount of silliness, right? Like like I think about like the fact that like we're introduced to Luke Skywalker complaining, where he like, and then he gets his hand cut off and he's like a crying mess. Or like in Avatar: The Last Airbender, every character is the butt of a joke at some point. They just are. Some more than others, looking at you, Sokka, but and Zuko actually for a really long time too. But yeah, like that's the thing, right? Like they're made more human by that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's important.
Yeah, the characters are allowed to be flawed, and the flaws aren't like what, like I don't know, like what, like heavy, like the flaws aren't like so like irrevocably horrible. They're just human, right? Like you said, like yeah, people get hurt, people are tired, people are the butt of jokes, people get wounded. That's reality, and in a way, it kind of brings them down. It takes these larger than life characters and makes you feel like you could be them. And the movie at no point takes that away from the audience.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't.
And yeah. That's something super special about this film. But yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. That's basically the plot of Act 4, is that it reminds you how human everybody is, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also like the peak of it's the culmination where the parody and the swashbuckling homage kind of cross paths.
Yeah, the in the final act, the parody starts to drop away, you know,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But
and
like,
it's mostly heart at that point.
yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? Like when parody and homage cross, you get heart, right?
Yeah,
That's what's so special.
I think
And
the
like,
thing that like then just takes it that one step past being just a loving homage into something a little bit more is the fact that you have the frame narrative throughout the thing,
yes.
right? Like the whole time, like the story happens and it's sweet and you're like touched and like Inigo overcomes and all of these things, right? And then we get the fact that like, yeah, even like at the end, it's like, yeah, this was still, yeah, it's sort of a ridiculous story. Yeah, they went off in the sunset. Yeah, that this like, and then they kissed and lived happily ever after. All of this stuff like is a little silly. But the point is that we all believe in love just a little bit more. And this kid
Yeah.
does too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that used that frame narrative beautifully. And I think there's a way to honestly read it in a sense that like by the last act, the kid is so invested
Yeah.
that it doesn't seem so ridiculous and silly to him anymore. And it becomes just a little bit more serious. Like
Yeah.
it takes itself a little more seriously because he does. Right.
Oh yeah, that's a great like reading of that scene. Yeah, for sure. A part of me always wonders too, like, is the grandpa actually reading from the book, or is the grandpa just making it up as he goes? Like that crosses my mind every now and then.
He is an unreliable narrator for sure.
Yeah.
Because he is more than willing to omit stuff from the book. He says so. He's like, oh, I'll skip the kissing bit. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's yeah, there's something really, really, really special. And I think the structure and the pieces that are kind of put into place of this puzzle, of this quilt that is the Princess Bride, I think really, really, it's like there must have been so much work done in the script and in the editing room to just like really finesse this whole movie, because like there's one like false move or one scene that lingers a little too long, and I think you lose it, the audience. It's just so wild to me.
Yeah.
And just like I think just like too, like this film I know has had a huge impact on your life and other people's lives as well. But and I think to watch this film now, like as an adult, and like see it, I'm like, this is what this genre should be today, right? Like you can't obviously recreate or remake The Princess Bride a bajillion times, but like that's what makes this genre so much fun.
And it's such a proof point on like how difficult it is. You know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like yeah, like there haven't been many films since or even before that manage it right in this quite the same way. And most films that do kind of strike a slightly different tone, right? Like I think I don't really know if I would put The Lord of the Rings and in this, but I think you can personally, I think you can put Monty Python and the Holy Grail, The Princess Bride, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, and Pirates of the Caribbean in this bucket. And they all achieve this thing in there. But if you think about it, like think about how many times a film tries and fails on doing this.
Right.
It's so easy to try to go too self-serious and miss the mark, and it comes off as cheesy or just too much camp, you know, and like someone who's like, yeah, you don't, you know, like or you go so far into parody, but because you ever so once in a while try to be earnest about it, then you just kind of come off as a little cruel, like you don't go far enough, right? You don't just like throw everything out the window like Monty Python did.
Yeah.
And so like, I guess the thing about it is like, yeah, on the one hand, like I wish there was more of this. And on the other hand, I'm like, I don't know if it can be done that often. Like truly, I just don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Like Pirates of the Caribbean did it and then immediately started to fail. Like immediately with their sequels. Like I don't know if Star Wars has fully recaptured it again. Because I don't think I would describe The Mandalorian or some of like the really good shows and stuff that's come out, like the stuff of Star Wars that I've truly, truly loved, as that swashbuckling thing. Really, I think it's good in other ways, but like I don't think of it as that in the same way. And so I'm like, I don't know. I don't know when we get our next one, right?
Yeah.
Stardust did it.
Ooh, Stardust
managed it too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems like we get like 1 or 2 a decade at most.
Yeah.
Right? Like we got like Star Wars and Monty Python in the 70s, Princess Bride in the 80s, Dragonheart in the 90s.
Yeah.
And then Pirates of the Caribbean and Stardust in the 2000s, and now I'm like, I don't know, like
yeah.
I can't really think of anything in the last decade or so, really.
Yeah. I mean, VGHS.
Yeah, VGHS. Yeah.
It's not, it's not quite swashbuckling, but
it has that similar like tone, but it doesn't. Yeah. It's not a swashbuckler film, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll just have to make a swashbuckler film, Dane.
Do it.
One of these days. I think that's one of these fine days. I think that's going to do it for this week, though.
Yeah.
And our review conversation about The Princess Bride, which thank you for sitting down and talking about this. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. That's it for this week. You can see what movies I'm watching on Letterboxd at Benig-Aiello, and conveniently at Benig-Aiello everywhere else. Dane, where can we find you and your swashbuckling existence?
You can find me on, you can't find me yet, but you can find my show Diceology, which is spelled like the science of dice, on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify. And don't hold me to this. Don't hold me to this too hard, but I think this time, the episode following this one, there will be a place for you to come see other things I do.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we are going to ride off into the sunset, and we'll see you next time, everybody.
Catch you later.